The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned industrial district as Marcus Chen adjusted his tactical vest one final time. The Galactic Enforcement Division had given him 48 hours to clear the Corvan separatists from Sector 7, or they would level the entire district with orbital bombardment. What they didn't know was that Marcus had no intention of using conventional methods. His earpiece crackled to life. "Chen, this is Command. Status report." "In position, sir," Marcus replied, his eyes scanning the maze of warehouses and manufacturing plants ahead. "Beginning insertion in 10 minutes. Remember, Chen, the Separatists have military-grade equipment. Hover tanks, plasma artillery, shield generators. You sure you don't want backup?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Negative, sir. I've got all the backup I need." Behind him, a low rumble emerged from the modified transport vehicle. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was organic, primal, and carried with it the weight of countless millennia of evolution. As the rear doors of the transport opened with a hydraulic hiss, something magnificent stepped into the morning light. Shadow was not just any Panther. At nearly 400 pounds, she was the result of a classified human genetic project that had been buried in government files for over a century. Her midnight black coat seemed to absorb light itself, and her amber eyes held an intelligence that unnerved even the most hardened soldiers. But it was her memory that made her truly extraordinary. Marcus had found her as a cub in the ruins of a research facility on Europa. The scientists there had been working on memory enhancement in large predators, attempting to create the perfect reconnaissance animals. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. Shadow remembered everything, every scent, every sound, every face, every tactical pattern. She could recall the exact layout of a building she'd been in once, 5 years earlier. She could identify an enemy by the sound of their breathing from a single previous encounter. More importantly, she never forgave. The Corvan separatists had made the mistake of attacking a human settlement 3 months ago. Shadow had been there during the evacuation, watching as the aliens had executed civilians without mercy. Their scent was burned into her memory forever, along with their heat signatures, their movement patterns, and their tactical preferences. "Time to hunt, girl," Marcus whispered, running his hand along her powerful flank. Shadow's ears twitched forward, and she let out a sound that was part purr, part growl. She had caught their scent on the wind. The separatists had chosen their stronghold well. The old titanium processing plant offered multiple defensive positions, with elevated platforms, narrow corridors, and reinforced walls. They had positioned their hover tanks at strategic choke points, while plasma artillery units covered the main approaches. Energy shields hummed around their defensive perimeters, creating nearly impenetrable barriers. Marcus studied the facility through his scope, noting the positions of the estimated 40 separatists holed up inside. Their leader, Commander Zaxhor, was a notorious war criminal who had been evading capture for years. The Corvans were a warrior species, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick, chitinous exoskeletons that could stop most conventional weapons. Their 4 arms made them deadly in combat, and their natural armor meant they could shrug off injuries that would kill most other species. But they had never faced anything like Shadow. "Command, beginning approach," Marcus transmitted. "Going dark for the next hour." He switched off his communicator and signaled to Shadow. She immediately melted into the shadows between 2 concrete barriers, her black form becoming virtually invisible even in daylight. Marcus followed, marveling at how silently she moved despite her massive size. The first sentry never saw her coming. Shadow had memorized the guard rotation from her position half a mile away, watching through enhanced feline vision as the separatists changed shifts. She knew that the Corvan stationed at the eastern watchtower would be looking toward the main road for exactly 37 seconds while his partner checked the southern approach. She struck during those 37 seconds. The 8-foot-tall alien warrior was lifted from his feet without a sound. Shadow's jaws clamped around his throat before he could cry out. Her enhanced strength, the result of human genetic tampering, allowed her to drag the 300-pound Corvan into the shadows as if he weighed nothing. Marcus followed her path, disabling the watchtower's communications array with a focused EMP burst. 1 down, 39 to go. The second guard position fell 10 minutes later. This time, Shadow used the ventilation system of an adjacent building, emerging directly behind 2 separatists who were monitoring thermal scanners. She remembered from her previous reconnaissance that these particular Corvans had a blind spot in their peripheral vision due to the placement of their compound eyes. She exploited this weakness perfectly, taking both guards down before either could reach their weapons. But it was at the third position that Shadow's memory truly showed its value. Commander Zaxhor himself was inspecting the northern defenses, accompanied by his personal guard. Shadow recognized his scent immediately. He had been present during the massacre at the human settlement. She also remembered something else. During that attack, Zaxhor had favored his left side when moving, suggesting an old injury that affected his mobility. She filed this information away for later use. Instead of attacking immediately, Shadow tracked the commander's inspection route, memorizing every step, every pause, every tactical discussion. She learned the positions of hidden weapon caches, the rotation schedules of the guard details, and the location of the command bunker where the separatists were coordinating their defense. Marcus watched through his tactical scope as Shadow gathered intelligence with the patience of a natural predator, combined with the analytical mind of a strategic computer. She was building a complete picture of the enemy's capabilities and weaknesses, something that would have taken a full reconnaissance team days to accomplish. By noon, Shadow had eliminated 6 more sentries without raising an alarm. Each kill was perfectly timed, exploiting gaps in patrol schedules that she had memorized from hours of observation. The separatists began to notice that their perimeter guards weren't checking in, but they assumed it was communication equipment failure, a common problem in the industrial district's electromagnetic interference. It wasn't until the first hover tank exploded that they realized they were under attack. Shadow had remembered the exact specifications of Corvan hover tanks from technical manuals Marcus had shown her months earlier. She knew their weak points, the cooling vents on the underside that couldn't be armored without affecting performance. Moving like liquid darkness, she had placed Marcus's explosive charges at precisely the right locations on 3 tanks, before retreating to a safe distance. The simultaneous explosions sent shockwaves through the separatist compound. Suddenly, their mobile armor advantage was gone, and panic began to set in. "Perimeter breach! Perimeter breach!" The alien voices crackled over intercepted communications. "Unknown hostiles! Possible stealth technology!" Commander Zaxhor's voice cut through the chatter. "Seal all entrances. Switch to thermal scanning. Deploy the hunter-killers." Marcus smiled as he heard this. The hunter-killers were autonomous combat drones, each the size of a small vehicle and armed with plasma cannons. They were designed to track and eliminate individual targets with ruthless efficiency. Against a normal infiltration team, they would be devastating. But Shadow wasn't normal. The first hunter-killer drone emerged from the main compound, its sensors sweeping the area in complex patterns. Its thermal imaging immediately picked up Marcus's heat signature from his concealed position 300 meters away. The drone never saw Shadow coming from above. She had climbed to the top of a processing tower, using her enhanced claws to scale the smooth metal walls. From there, she had calculated the drone's patrol pattern and positioned herself directly above its projected path. When it passed underneath, she dropped like a stone, her 400 pounds of genetically enhanced muscle driving her claws through the drone's armor plating. The machine sparked and died, its systems overwhelmed by the massive electrical discharge that Shadow's enhanced nervous system generated on command, another gift from the human scientists who had created her. The second drone lasted slightly longer, managing to fire 3 plasma bolts before Shadow's reflexes carried her out of the line of fire. She had remembered the exact firing rate and targeting algorithms of these drones from previous encounters with similar models. She used this knowledge to stay one step ahead of its weapons, striking when its capacitors were recharging and its targeting systems were recalibrating. By evening, the Separatist compound was in chaos. Half their guards were missing, their mobile armor was destroyed, their hunter-killer drones were scrap metal, and they still hadn't gotten a clear look at their attacker. Marcus checked his watch. 36 hours until orbital bombardment. He activated his communicator. "Command, this is Chen. Beginning Phase 2. "Copy that, Chen. Situation report?" "Outer defenses neutralized. Moving to primary objectives." There was a pause. "Chen, our satellites show massive explosions in your sector. What's your status?" Marcus looked at Shadow, who was cleaning her claws with the methodical precision of a house cat, despite having just destroyed 3 million credits worth of military hardware. "Everything's under control, sir. Shadow and I are just getting started." As darkness fell over the industrial district, the real hunt was about to begin. Shadow's amber eyes gleamed in the fading light, and somewhere in the compound ahead, Commander Zaxhor was about to learn why humans were considered the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because of their technology, or their weapons, or their tactics, but because when humans decided to hunt something, they brought friends who never, ever forgot. The titanium processing plant transformed into a maze of terror as Shadow moved through its corridors like a living nightmare. Her enhanced memory had cataloged every air duct, every maintenance tunnel, every structural weakness in the building. What the Corvan separatists saw as an impregnable fortress, she saw as a hunting ground designed specifically for her abilities. Marcus followed at a distance, his role shifting from operator to coordinator. Through his tactical display, he monitored Shadow's vital signs and position, while she executed maneuvers that no military academy had ever taught. She wasn't just hunting, she was conducting a psychological warfare campaign that would have impressed human special forces. The Separatists had barricaded themselves on the 3rd floor, where their heavy weapons could cover the main stairwells and elevator shafts. Energy barriers hummed across every entrance, creating fields that could stop armor-piercing rounds or plasma bolts. They had positioned their remaining forces in overlapping fields of fire, with Commander Zaxhor coordinating from a reinforced command center at the building's heart. What they hadn't considered was that Shadow didn't need to use the entrances. She had memorized the building's structural plans from files Marcus had shown her weeks earlier during a routine intelligence briefing about Corvan defensive tactics. Now, that perfect recall served her as she navigated through spaces that the architects had never intended for occupation. The first indication that their fortress wasn't impregnable came when Specialist Korthax simply vanished. The Corvan warrior had been monitoring the eastern approach through a reinforced window, his plasma rifle trained on the stairwell below. His partner was checking ammunition supplies just 3 meters away. One moment, Korthax was reporting all clear. The next moment, there was only an empty window and the faint sound of claws on metal echoing through the ventilation system above. "Korthax, report!" Commander Zaxhor's voice crackled over the comm system. Silence. "Section 4, visual confirmation on Korthax." The partner turned toward the window where his comrade had been standing. The reinforced barrier was intact, the energy field was still active, and there were no signs of forced entry. It was as if Korthax had simply ceased to exist. "Command, Korthax is gone. No signs of struggle. No breach in our perimeter." Shadow was already 3 levels above them, moving through the building's superstructure with impossible stealth. She had accessed the ventilation system through an emergency maintenance shaft that the Corvans hadn't even known existed. Her enhanced senses allowed her to track every defender through the building's metal framework, their heat signatures, their breathing patterns, their nervous movements as fear began to spread through their ranks. She selected her next target with the precision of a chess master. Sergeant Vexnell was the Separatists' communications specialist, positioned in a central hub where he could coordinate between the different defensive positions. Taking him out wouldn't just eliminate another enemy, it would blind and isolate the remaining forces. Shadow dropped through a maintenance hatch directly above his position, but instead of attacking immediately, she waited. Her perfect memory had recorded Vexnall's communication schedule from intercepted transmissions. She knew he would be conducting a status check in exactly 90 seconds, during which all the defensive positions would be focused on their reports rather than their surroundings. When the moment came, she struck. Vexnall was speaking into his headset when 400 pounds of genetically enhanced predator landed on his back. His transmission cut off mid-sentence, but Shadow was already moving, disabling the communication array with precise strikes that her enhanced cognition had calculated to cause maximum system disruption. "Communications hub, respond!" Commander Zaxhor's voice echoed through the building's speakers. "Vexnall, status report!" The only answer was static. Now isolated from each other, the remaining separatists began to panic. They could hear movement in the walls, glimpses of shadow where nothing should be able to move, and the occasional sound that might have been claws or might have been their imagination. Shadow used their fear against them. She had studied Corvan psychology extensively, analyzing their behavioral patterns during previous conflicts. She knew they were a proud warrior species that relied heavily on group cohesion and clear command structures. Isolated and confused, they became increasingly erratic and prone to mistakes. She began to toy with them. A guard would glimpse movement at the edge of his vision, spin to investigate and find nothing. Another would hear breathing that wasn't his own, coming from the ventilation grates above. Equipment would malfunction for no apparent reason. Shadows would move against the light in ways that defied physics. Marcus monitored the psychological deterioration through his surveillance equipment, watching thermal signatures spike with adrenaline as the Separatists' stress levels climbed toward breaking points. Shadow wasn't just eliminating targets, she was systematically destroying their morale and unit cohesion. The breaking point came when she took Trooper Kixmoth. He was guarding the southern stairwell, his weapon trained on the energy barrier that sealed the entrance. His orders were simple: watch the barrier, report any changes, and fire on anything that tried to breach the perimeter. Shadow came through the floor. The building's original construction included industrial lifting systems that connected every level through a network of hidden shafts. Shadow had discovered these during her initial reconnaissance, and her perfect memory had mapped every access point and connection. She emerged from a maintenance panel directly beneath Kixmoth's position, moving with such speed that he never had a chance to cry out. But this time, she left evidence of her presence. When the relief guard arrived for the shift change, he found Kixmoth's weapon standing upright against the wall, its barrel twisted into an impossible knot. Deep claw marks scored the metal floor in a pattern that spelled out a message in crude Corvan script: "You cannot hide." Word of the discovery spread through the remaining defenders like wildfire. The supernatural implications terrified them more than conventional weapons ever could. They were facing something that could bend metal with its bare claws, move through solid barriers, and leave taunting messages for its victims. Commander Zaxhor tried to restore order through the building's speaker system, but his words fell on increasingly deaf ears. His remaining forces were breaking down, abandoning their positions to huddle together in groups that felt safer, but were actually more vulnerable to Shadow's attacks. She struck the largest group just after midnight. 7 separatists had congregated in the main processing chamber, their weapons forming a defensive circle as they watched every entrance simultaneously. They had positioned themselves in the center of the room, far from any walls or potential hiding spots. with clear sight lines in every direction. Shadow came from below. The chamber's floor was actually a graded platform suspended over industrial machinery that had been dormant for decades. Shadow accessed this space through drainage systems that connected to the building's foundation, emerging among the rusted equipment like a ghost materialized from the industrial graveyard. Her assault was swift and precise. She had calculated the exact sequence of attacks needed to neutralize 7 targets before any could raise an alarm or return fire. Enhanced reflexes and strength allowed her to move between targets faster than their nervous systems could process the threat. The chamber fell silent in less than 15 seconds. Marcus checked his chronometer. 24 hours until orbital bombardment. Time for the final phase. He activated his communicator on an open channel, knowing the remaining separatists would intercept the transmission. "Shadow, this is Marcus. Status report." Her response came as a low growl that carried clearly over the communication system, audible to every surviving defender in the building. "Good girl. How many left?" Another growl, longer this time, with subtle variations in pitch that Marcus had learned to interpret. 11 targets remaining, including the primary objective. "Copy that. Commander Zaxhor is in the central bunker with 10 guards. Begin final approach." Marcus switched off the communicator and smiled grimly. The psychological warfare phase was complete. Now came the direct confrontation. In the command bunker, Commander Zaxhor stared at his tactical display with growing desperation. In less than 12 hours, he had lost more than 2/3 of his force to an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, and couldn't fight using conventional tactics. His remaining guards clustered around him, their weapons trained on the bunker's single entrance. The blast doors were sealed and reinforced with energy barriers. The walls were solid titanium steel composite, thick enough to withstand direct hits from orbital bombardment. The ventilation system was protected by micro-force fields that would stop anything larger than a dust particle. They had created the perfect fortress within a fortress, which was exactly what Shadow had been waiting for. She had spent the entire night memorizing every defensive measure the Separatists employed, every technological advantage they possessed, every tactical doctrine they followed. Now she was ready to show them the fundamental flaw in their thinking. They were fighting a war. She was conducting a hunt. And somewhere in the walls around their impregnable bunker, 400 pounds of genetically enhanced vengeance was preparing to remind them that when humans decided to eliminate a threat, they didn't always play by the rules of civilized warfare. The final phase was about to begin. Dawn broke over the industrial district as Shadow positioned herself for the final assault. The command bunker represented everything the Corvan Separatists believed would protect them: advanced technology, overwhelming firepower, and impenetrable defenses. They had forgotten the most important lesson of galactic warfare. The most dangerous predator is the one that thinks like its prey. Marcus watched through his tactical display as Shadow's vital signs remained perfectly calm despite the magnitude of the task ahead. Her enhanced nervous system showed none of the stress indicators that would spike in any normal creature facing such overwhelming odds. Instead, her readings resembled those of a cat preparing to catch a mouse, patient, focused, and utterly confident in the outcome. Inside the bunker, Commander Zaxhor paced between monitoring stations as his remaining 10 guards maintained their defensive positions. The blast doors were sealed with triple redundancy systems. Energy barriers hummed at full power across every potential entry point. Automated defense turrets tracked continuously, their targeting systems calibrated to respond to anything larger than an insect. "Sir," one of his lieutenants reported, "we've been monitoring the humans' communications. There's been no activity for the past 3 hours. Zaxhor's compound eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical readouts. "The orbital bombardment begins in 8 hours. They may have withdrawn to a safe distance." It was exactly the conclusion Shadow had wanted him to reach. She had spent the pre-dawn hours not attacking, but learning. Every defensive system has a pattern, every automated response follows predictable algorithms, and every technological advantage comes with exploitable weaknesses. Her enhanced memory had recorded and analyzed thousands of data points about the bunker's operations. She knew that the automated turrets had a blind spot lasting 0.3 seconds during their rotation cycle. She knew that the energy barriers generated electromagnetic interference that affected the motion sensors in a specific pattern. She knew that the air filtration system cycled every 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Most importantly, she knew that the Corvins' confidence in their technology made them predictable. The attack began at exactly 00647 hours. Shadow's approach vector defied every tactical manual ever written. Instead of trying to breach the defenses, she made herself part of them. The bunker's ventilation system was protected by microforce fields designed to prevent infiltration, but these barriers were calibrated to stop solid objects. Shadow had discovered that the electromagnetic discharge she could generate disrupted the field's coherence for exactly 1.2 seconds, long enough for something her size to pass through if timed perfectly. She entered the system during the air filtration cycle, when the increased airflow would mask her heat signature and the mechanical noise would cover any sound. Her perfect memory guided her through a maze of ducts and channels that she had memorized from architectural plans, moving through spaces barely large enough to accommodate her massive frame. The first indication of her presence came when the lights went out. Shadow had located the bunker's main power conduit, a heavily shielded cable that the designers had considered impossible to access from within the ventilation system. They were wrong. Shadow's enhanced claws could generate focused electrical discharges powerful enough to overload the shielding, and her perfect memory told her exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Emergency lighting activated immediately, casting the bunker in blood-red illumination that made shadows dance across every surface. The defenders raised their weapons, scanning for threats that their training had never prepared them to face. "Maintain positions!" Commander Zaxhor barked. "It's just a power fluctuation. Backup systems are online." But Shadow was already inside their perimeter. She had emerged from an air return vent positioned directly above the command center, using the confusion of the power failure to mask her entry. Now she clung to the ceiling like a living shadow, her black coat making her virtually invisible against the darkened metal overhead. She dropped onto the first guard with surgical precision. Lieutenant Caxwell never saw her coming. One moment he was scanning the sealed entrance for threats. The next moment, 400 pounds of genetically enhanced predator landed on his shoulders. Shadow's enhanced reflexes allowed her to control the fall, bringing them both to the ground in complete silence. The other guards remained focused on the perimeter, unaware that the threat was already among them. Shadow's next target was the weapons operator controlling the automated turrets. She had memorized his position from thermal scans and calculated the exact approach that would keep her in the blind spots of both the remaining guards and the automated systems. Sergeant Thexnor died without making a sound, his weapon systems going offline as Shadow's claws found the manual override switches with mechanical precision. Now the bunker's automated defenses were blind, and the Separatists still didn't realize their fortress had been breached. Shadow began to hunt in earnest. Her enhanced memory contained detailed psychological profiles of every species in the galactic database, including comprehensive data on Corvin sensory capabilities and combat reflexes. She used this knowledge to exploit weaknesses that the defenders didn't even know they possessed. Corvins had excellent forward vision but poor peripheral awareness below their eye level. Shadow attacked from a crouched position, staying below their natural sight lines. Their chitinous exoskeletons were nearly impervious to energy weapons, but vulnerable to precise physical trauma applied to joint connections. Shadow's claws found these weak points with surgical accuracy. Their warrior culture emphasized individual combat prowess, making them prone to breaking formation when faced with multiple threats. Shadow used hit-and-run tactics to isolate and eliminate them one at a time. By 0700 hours, only Commander Zaxhor remained alive in the command bunker. He stood in the center of the chamber, his weapon trained on the shadows that seemed to move independently of the emergency lighting. His thermal sensors showed impossible readings, heat signatures that appeared and vanished, movement patterns that defied physics, and what appeared to be a massive predator that could somehow become invisible at will. "Show yourself!" he roared in accented standard. "Face me like a warrior!" Shadow emerged from the darkness like a nightmare given form. Her amber eyes reflected the emergency lighting as she padded into the open, her massive frame moving with fluid grace that made her appear to flow rather than walk. Every line of her body spoke of barely contained violence, of a perfect killing machine that had been designed specifically for this moment. Zaxhor's weapon whined as it charged to full power. At this range, his plasma rifle could punch through titanium plating. Against an unarmored target, it would cause total molecular disruption. But Shadow had fought armed opponents before. She had perfect recall of every weapon's engagement in her past, including detailed analysis of Corvin plasma rifle performance characteristics. She knew the weapon's charge time, its targeting capabilities, and most importantly, its operator's likely response patterns. Zaxhor fired 3 times in rapid succession, each shot precisely aimed at center mass. The plasma bolts seared through the air where Shadow had been standing, but she was no longer there. Her enhanced reflexes and perfect memory of the chamber's layout allowed her to move through the space like liquid lightning, never remaining in one position long enough for targeting systems to lock onto her heat signature. She flowed between obstacles that she had memorized during her reconnaissance, using every piece of equipment and furniture as cover. But she wasn't just evading, she was positioning. Shadow had analyzed Zaxhor's movement patterns during their previous encounter at the human settlement. She remembered his favoring of his left side, the slight hesitation in his reaction time, and the specific tactical preferences that marked him as a veteran commander. She used all of this against him. When she struck, it was from his blind spot, at the exact moment when his weapon was cycling between shots. Her massive frame hit him like a guided missile, driving him to the ground with enough force to crack his exoskeleton. But she didn't kill him immediately. Instead, Shadow held him pinned while he stared up into her amber eyes. In those depths, he saw something that chilled him more than the prospect of death. He saw recognition. This creature remembered him, remembered what he had done, remembered every civilian he had executed during that raid 3 months ago. "You remember," he whispered in shock. Shadow's response was a low growl that seemed to carry the voices of every human who had died under his command. Marcus's voice echoed through the bunker's speaker system as he activated the communication array. "Commander Zaxhor, this is Marcus Chen of the Galactic Enforcement Division. You are under arrest for crimes against humanity." "The human," Zaxhor gasped, still pinned beneath Shadow's massive paws. "How did you do this? How did you defeat our defenses?" Marcus entered the bunker through the main doors, which opened easily now that Shadow had disabled the locking mechanisms from within. He looked around at the evidence of her work. 10 elite Corvin warriors eliminated without a single shot being fired, their supposedly impregnable fortress turned into a tomb by a creature that fought not with advanced technology, but with perfect memory and primal intelligence. "You made a fundamental mistake," Marcus explained as he secured restraints around Zaxhor's 4 arms. "You prepared to fight an army. I brought a predator." Shadow released her grip on the commander and padded over to Marcus, accepting the affectionate scratch behind her ears that she had earned. Her perfect memory would record every detail of this mission, adding to the vast database of tactical knowledge that made her the most effective hunter in the galaxy. Command, this is Chen, Marcus reported through his communicator. Objective secured. No orbital bombardment required. Copy that, Chen. Casualties? Marcus looked around the bunker at the efficiency of Shadow's work. 11 hostile combatants eliminated, 1 primary target captured alive. 0 friendly casualties. There was a long pause. Chen, our satellites show no evidence of a firefight, no energy weapon discharges, no explosions, no signs of conventional combat. How did you neutralize 40-plus hostiles with minimal equipment? Marcus smiled as Shadow settled beside him, her amber eyes already scanning for new threats, with the patience of a creature that never forgot anything and never gave up on a hunt. Sir, I didn't use minimal equipment. I used maximum evolution. Turns out when you give a perfect predator perfect memory and 3 months to plan revenge, armored vehicles become irrelevant. As they prepared to leave the industrial district, Marcus reflected on the lesson that the galaxy was slowly learning about humanity. It wasn't their technology that made them dangerous, or their weapons, or their tactics. It was their ability to form bonds with other species, to enhance and direct natural capabilities toward specific goals. Shadow padded beside him as they walked toward the extraction point, her massive form casting shadows that seemed to move independently in the morning light. Somewhere in her perfect memory, she was already analyzing the next mission, the next threat, the next hunt that would require her unique capabilities. The Galactic Enforcement Division had sent 1 human and 1 Panther to clear 43 separatists from a fortified position. What they got was a reminder that the most dangerous weapon in the universe isn't always the most advanced one. Sometimes it's the one that remembers everything and forgives nothing. Behind them, the industrial district stood silent except for the sound of approaching medical transports coming to collect Commander Zax Hoare and process the scene. The orbital bombardment had been canceled, the threat eliminated with surgical precision, and another entry added to the growing legend of human tactical innovation. In the wider galaxy, military tacticians would study this engagement for decades, trying to understand how conventional defensive doctrine had been so thoroughly defeated by unconventional methods. They would analyze force compositions, technological advantages, and strategic deployments. They would miss the point entirely. Marcus scratched Shadow behind the ears one more time as their transport arrived. She purred with satisfaction, a sound that somehow managed to be both comforting and terrifying at the same time. Good hunt, girl. Ready for the next one? Shadow's amber eyes gleamed as she spotted movement in the distance. A small maintenance drone performing routine functions. Her perfect memory cataloged its movement pattern, its operational specifications, and its potential threat level in the time it took Marcus to blink. She was always ready for the next hunt. After all, she never forgot anything. And in a galaxy full of threats to humanity that made her the most valuable weapon of all,